This is wrong. I did not order room service at 2 a.m. Someone needs to fix this right now.
Good evening, sir. I'm Sarah. I'll take care of this personally. Can I see that for you? You're absolutely right, Nat. This charge shouldn't be here. I'm removing it completely.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Not at all. Enjoy the rest of your stay.
He had his name on the building. His face on the covers of magazines. His voice in rooms where presidents sat and listened. And then, in the space of one single board meeting, one Thursday afternoon in October, it was all gone. Not slowly. Not painfully over time. Gone. Like someone reached into his chest, grabbed everything he had built with his bare hands, and pulled. This is the story of a man named Richard Calloway. And if you think you know how this ends, I promise you, you don't. Before we go any further, we'd love to know, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments right now. We read every single one. And if you're new here, click that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories, because what we share here will stay with you long after the video ends. Richard Calloway did not inherit his wealth. He built it the way only a certain kind of man can, with obsession, sleeplessness, and a hunger that never fully went away no matter how much he fed it. He grew up in Dayton, Ohio, the second of 3 boys, raised by a mother who cleaned office buildings at night and a father who repaired HVAC systems until his knees gave out. Richard watched his parents work themselves into the ground and promised himself, not out of arrogance, but out of love, that their lives would mean something more. That their sacrifice would lead somewhere. He was 17 when he made that promise. He was 23 when he got his first real estate license. He was 31 when he bought his first hotel. By the time Richard was 46, the Calloway Grand Hotel Group had 12 properties across 9 states. The flagship, the one he was most proud of, the one he had personally redesigned twice, the one where he had chosen the marble in the lobby himself, was the Calloway Grand Chicago. 42 floors. Rooftop bar. A restaurant on the 28th floor with a Michelin star. He used to stand at the floor-to-ceiling windows on the top floor and watch the city breathe at night, the lights of Lakeshore Drive reflecting off the water, and feel something close to peace. Not pride, exactly. Peace. Like a man who had carried something very heavy for a very long time and had finally found a place to set it down. His personal life was quieter than people expected. He had been married once, to a woman named Diane, and it had lasted 11 years before the hours and the hotels and the endless travel had quietly hollowed it out. They ended things without screaming, which Richard always thought was somehow sadder than if they had. He had a daughter, Mia, who was 22 now and studying architecture at the University of Michigan, who called him every Sunday morning without fail, even when he forgot to charge his phone. He lived alone in a penthouse he barely slept in. He had a driver named Earl who had been with him for 9 years and who made the same terrible coffee every morning in a small paper cup that Richard drank without complaint. He had assistants and lawyers and a CFO named Gerald who Richard trusted more than almost anyone on the planet. And then Gerald betrayed him. It started, the way many catastrophes do, with a meeting that looked completely routine. Richard had been in a dozen board meetings that month, reviewing acquisitions, discussing a new property in Nashville, signing off on renovations at the Miami location. So when he walked into the 34th floor conference room of his own headquarters on that Thursday in October, there was no alarm in his chest. No cold feeling at the back of his neck. He was wearing his navy suit. He had a coffee from downstairs. He was 12 minutes early, the way he always was. Gerald was already in the room. So were the other 6 board members. So were 2 lawyers Richard had never seen before. And so was a man named Preston Hale, the founder of a real estate investment group out of Dallas that Richard had met twice at industry conferences and dismissed both times as someone who smiled too much and listened too little. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. Richard did not speak for 37 of them. He sat in his own chair, at his own table, in his own building, and listened as Gerald, calm, precise, rehearsed Gerald, presented the case for a shareholder-driven leadership transition. The documents were already prepared. The votes had already been cast, quietly, over the previous 6 weeks, while Richard had been in Miami approving tire samples for the new spa wing. Preston Hale's investment group had been quietly purchasing shares. Gerald had been facilitating it. The board had been watching it unfold, and not one of them had picked up the phone. When Richard finally spoke, he asked one question. He looked directly at Gerard and said, "How long?" Gerard did not look away. He said, 8 months. 8 months. Richard nodded slowly, the way a man does when the ground beneath him has already shifted but his body hasn't processed it yet. He stood up. He straightened his jacket. He shook no hands. He walked out of the building, got into the backseat of Earl's car, and said nothing for 6 minutes. Then he said, "Take me to the Chicago property." And Earl, who always understood more than he was told, drove without asking why. "Can I ask you something? If you were Richard, if someone you had trusted for nearly a decade had done this to you, what would you feel first? Anger? Grief? Or something worse, the cold, quiet shock of realizing the betrayal had been happening right next to you and you never saw it? Tell me in the comments. I want to know." The legal fight was immediate and brutal. Richard's personal attorneys filed injunctions. There were emergency hearings. There were counterfilings. The financial press got wind of it within 48 hours, and the headlines were not kind. Calloway hospitality in turmoil. Founder ousted in boardroom coup. Hale Group takes control of Chicago flagship. Richard's lawyers told him the process could take 6 to 18 months. His personal accounts had been frozen as part of a dispute over a shareholder loan agreement that Gerard had structured in a way that gave the new group leverage over Richard's personal assets. His attorneys were working to undo it, but it would take time. Everything, suddenly, required time that felt like years. His penthouse was part of a building owned by a subsidiary that was now under the operational control of the Hale Group pending the court's ruling. He had 48 hours to vacate. He called Mia and told her only that he was dealing with a business situation and that she should not worry. She heard the flatness in his voice and said, "Dad, what's really happening?" He said, "I'll call you Sunday." He didn't sleep that night. With his liquid assets tied up and his legal team burning through retainer fees, Richard spent 3 days in a hotel near O'Hare, a mid-range chain. Nothing wrong with it, but the kind of place where the breakfast was powdered eggs and the elevator moved like it was apologizing for itself. On the 4th day, almost without planning it, he got into a cab and gave the driver the address of the Calloway Grand Chicago. He told himself he just needed to look at it. To remind himself what he was fighting for. The cab pulled up to the front entrance, the same entrance he had redesigned twice, with the canopy he had ordered from an Italian fabricator and the brass fittings he had polished personally before the reopening in 2019, and Richard sat in the back seat for a long moment. Then he paid the driver and walked inside. The lobby was exactly as he had built it. Warm lighting. The smell of cedar and vanilla that he had spent 3 weeks choosing with a fragrance designer in New York. The sound of low, unhurried piano music from the bar around the corner. The floors were the Carrara marble he had approved himself. The flowers at the front desk were fresh. Everything was exactly right. And it belonged, at least for now, to someone else. He sat down in one of the deep leather chairs near the fireplace, chairs he had selected from a furniture showroom in Milan, and he opened his briefcase and began reading legal documents. A young woman at the front desk glanced over at him twice. He didn't notice. He just sat there, in his navy suit, in his own lobby, reading papers about the company he had built, trying to find the thread that would pull everything back together. He came back the next day. And the day after that. Her name was Sarah Emmons. She was 34 years old, a night shift front desk supervisor who had worked at the Calloway Grand for 3 years. She had a 7-year-old son named Marcus who went to school 2 blocks from her apartment in Wicker Park, and a mother in Indianapolis who called every Tuesday. She drove a 2018 Honda Civic with a cracked rear bumper she hadn't gotten around to fixing. She worked the 6-to-2 shift because the overnight differential added $40 a week to her paycheck, and $40 a week, when you are raising a child alone, is not a small thing. Sarah noticed Richard on his 3rd visit. Not because he was well-dressed, plenty of well-dressed men sat in the lobby of a hotel like this. But because of the way he sat. Most guests in lobby chairs were waiting for something, a car, a companion, a check-in time. This man wasn't waiting. He was reading, intently, with the posture of someone who was trying very hard not to look defeated. And there was something about the way he looked at the room occasionally, not admiring it exactly. More like checking it. Like a man who knew a room down to its bones and was making sure everything was still in place. On his 5th visit, she brought him a coffee without being asked. She set it on the side table next to him, their hotel blend, dark roast, the one he had personally selected from a roaster in Colombia, and said, "You look like you could use this." Richard looked up. He said, "Thank you." "How did you know?" She said, "Lucky guess." She started to walk away. He said, "It's a good coffee." She paused and said, "Yeah. I've always thought so. Whoever chose it had good taste." And she went back to the desk. He smiled for the first time in 8 days. Pause right there for a second. Have you ever been at your absolute lowest point and had a complete stranger show you one small, simple act of kindness that changed the temperature of the whole day? Because that's what this was. That coffee wasn't just a coffee. That was a lifeline. And neither of them knew it yet. Over the next 3 weeks, Richard became a quiet, regular presence in the lobby. He always arrived around 7 in the evening, always sat in the same chair by the fireplace, always ordered dinner from the bar, usually the short rib, sometimes the salmon, and worked until close to midnight. The staff knew him only as a quiet gentleman who tipped well and caused no trouble. No one connected him to the name on the building, partly because his photo had only run in trade publications, and partly because the Hale Group had moved quickly to scrub his image from the hotel's marketing materials. The lobby portrait of Richard that had hung near the elevator bank had been replaced with an abstract landscape painting within the first week. He noticed that, the first night, he stood in front of the abstract painting for a long moment and then went to his chair. He didn't say anything to anyone about it. Sarah started talking to him on her breaks. Not because the hotel encouraged it, it didn't, particularly, but because there was something about this man that she couldn't place, something that made her curious in the way that certain people make you curious not because they are flashy but because they are still. Stillness in a person, she had learned, usually means they have been through something. "Do you work nearby?" she asked him once. He said, "I used to work here, actually." She said, "Oh, what did you do?" He said, "Management." She laughed a little and said, "That's vague." He said, "It was a complicated job." She said, "Most good ones are." He asked about her life in the way people rarely ask, not as small talk, but as if he actually wanted to know. She told him about Marcus, about his obsession with dinosaurs and his terrible habit of leaving Legos on the bathroom floor. She told him about the drive to work each night and the podcast she listened to, a true crime series she was embarrassed to admit she liked. Richard said, "Don't be embarrassed. It means you're paying attention to the world." She gave him a look and said, "That might be the most philosophical response anyone has ever given me about my podcast." He laughed. It surprised him, the sound of his own laughter, how foreign it felt. One night in mid-November, Sarah came back from her break to find him still at the fireplace, but the briefcase was closed and his eyes were fixed on the flames. When she sat down across from him, she had stopped pretending she wasn't sitting down to talk to him. She said, "Hard day." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I built something for 20 years. And someone I trusted helped take it away. And the worst part is not the losing. The worst part is that I sat in a room and I didn't see it coming. And I keep thinking, what else didn't I see?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My son's father told me he was leaving on a Tuesday morning while Marcus was eating cereal. Just like that. And I sat in that kitchen after he walked out and I thought, were there signs? Did I miss them? And I drove myself crazy with that for about a year." Richard said, "How did you stop?" She said, "I stopped asking what I missed and started asking what I still had." The fire crackled. Neither of them spoke for a little while. 6 weeks into this arrangement, Richard in the lobby, Sarah on the night shift, their conversations growing longer and quieter and more honest, something happened that neither of them expected. A guest at the bar got agitated over a billing error, loud enough that the bartender called for a manager. The overnight manager was tied up on a call. Sarah walked over, calm and steady, the way people who have handled genuinely hard things are calm in situations that are merely uncomfortable. She sorted it in 4 minutes. She didn't raise her voice once. She gave the guest a small room credit, shook his hand, and walked back to the desk. Richard watched the whole thing. When she passed him, he said, "You're very good at that." She said, "It's just people. People are mostly scared about something when they get like that." He said, "That's a remarkably generous way to see it." She shrugged and said, "It's a true way to see it." That night, after she came back from walking a guest to a late checkout, she found a folded note on the side table where she sometimes left his coffee. On it was written, in careful handwriting, "I've worked with hundreds of people in hospitality over 20 years. You have something most of them didn't. I hope you know that. No name." She looked over at his chair. It was empty. He had gone for the night. She read the note twice, folded it, and put it in her coat pocket. She did not throw it away. What she didn't know, what she had absolutely no way of knowing, was that the chair she had been bringing coffee to every night, the chair she had been sitting across from and having the most honest conversation she'd had in years, belonged to the man whose portrait had hung in that lobby until 6 weeks ago. The man whose name was on the list. The man who had chosen the marble floors she stood on every night. She didn't know. And Richard hadn't told her, not because he was hiding something shameful, but because sitting in that lobby as just a man, no title, no corner office, no weight of reputation, was the first time in 2 decades that he felt like someone was actually seeing him. It was a Tuesday in December, just after 11 at night. The lobby was quiet. Richard was at the fireplace. Sarah had 20 minutes left on her shift. She sat down with 2 cups of coffee and said, "Okay. I have to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me." He said, "All right." She said, "Who are you? Like, really?" He was still for a moment. Then he said, "What makes you ask?" She said, "Because last week one of our senior staff mentioned the name Calloway while we were looking at a repair order for the lobby fireplace, this fireplace, right here, and I looked it up. I saw photos." She paused. "That's you, isn't it?" Richard said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Yes." Sarah set her coffee down. She said, "You own this hotel?" He said, "I built it. Whether I own it right now is a question my attorneys are still working on." She stared at him. Then she said, "And you've been sitting here every night for 6 weeks." He said, "It's the only place that still feels like mine." His voice was even. But she saw something in his eyes that she recognized, the look of someone who is holding a very large amount of grief in a very small container. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "Does it bother you that I didn't know?" He said, "No. That's the only reason I kept coming back. Think about that." He kept coming back not to his wealth, not to his name, not to his power. He kept coming back because one person was treating him like a human being. Does that change the way you see the story? Does that change the way you see your own daily interactions with the people around you? I want to know. Tell me in the comments. Part 8, The Turn. 2 weeks before Christmas, Richard's legal team delivered news that cut both ways. The injunction had been partially upheld. The asset freeze on his personal accounts was being lifted. The court had found procedural irregularities in the shareholder vote. Specifically, several votes had been cast using a proxy agreement that Gerald had prepared and that the other shareholders had signed without fully reading. The full case would continue into the new year, but Richard's attorneys were now cautiously optimistic. "You're going to get it back," his lead attorney told him. "Not all at once. But you're going to get it back." Richard sat in his car outside his attorney's office for 15 minutes after that call and did not feel what he expected to feel. He expected relief. What he felt instead was complicated, a mixture of vindication and exhaustion and something else he couldn't immediately name. He called Mia. She cried a little, which made him cry a little, which is the kind of thing that happens between fathers and daughters when months of held tension finally breaks. Then he drove to the Calloway Grand Chicago and sat in his chair by the fireplace. Sarah's shift didn't start for an hour. He ordered dinner. He ate slowly. He watched the lobby, the light on the marble, the way the guests moved through the space, the care with which the night staff carried themselves. He had built this. He had chosen every detail of this place. And for the first time in 2 months, he felt like it was still his, not because a court had said so, but because something inside him had stopped letting go of it. When Sarah arrived, she could see from across the lobby that something had changed in him. She sat down and said, "Good news." He said, "Something like that." She said, "Tell me." He said, "I might actually win this." She smiled, not a polite smile, a real one, the kind that changes a person's whole face, and said, "I never doubted it." He said, "You barely know me." She said, "I know you pretty well, actually." He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them was talking about the hotel anymore. 3 months later, in the spring, Richard Calloway was reinstated as controlling shareholder and CEO of Calloway Hospitality following a court ruling that invalidated the proxy votes used in the hostel takeover. Preston Hale's group contested briefly and then settled. Gerald resigned before he could be removed and was later the subject of a separate civil case. Richard held a quiet press conference in the lobby of the Calloway Grand Chicago, the same lobby where he had sat for 2 months in the shadows of his own empire, and read a short statement thanking his legal team and the staff of his hotels for their steadiness during a difficult period. He meant every word. But the words he meant most were the ones he didn't say in front of cameras. The ones he said later that afternoon, when the press had cleared out and the lobby was quiet again and he walked to the front desk, where Sarah Emmons was finishing paperwork before her shift ended. He stood in front of her desk, the same desk where she had made the decision to bring a stranger a cup of coffee 7 weeks earlier, and he said, "I want you to know that I'm going to do something with this hotel group that I should have done years ago. I'm going to start promoting from within. And I'd like to start by offering you a director-level hospitality management role, with a salary that reflects what you're actually worth. No obligation. Think about it." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. She said, "Can I ask you a question first?" He said, "Of course." She said, "Is this a job offer or a thank you?" He said, "Both. And neither is more important than the other." She said, "Okay. I'll think about it." She took the business card he slid across the desk. She read it carefully: Richard Calloway, founder and CEO, Calloway Hospitality Group. She looked up at him and said, "You know, I always thought whoever chose this coffee blend had good taste." He smiled. "I know," he said. "I heard you." She took the job. And 2 years later, when Richard stood at the ceremony for the opening of the 14th Calloway Grand property, in Denver, Colorado, he introduced Sarah Emmons as his vice president of guest experience. She stood beside him in front of a room full of investors and journalists and hotel staff, and she looked out at the crowd, and she thought about a Tuesday night in December when she sat down across from a quiet man by a fireplace and had the most honest conversation of her life. And she thought about Marcus, who was 9 now and had recently decided he wanted to be an architect, which made her laugh every time, because of the man who had changed the course of their lives while sitting in a chair his own hands had chosen. Richard spoke briefly at the podium. He said, "The most important thing I've learned in 25 years of building hotels is that the people who hold everything together are almost never the ones whose names are on the buildings. I lost sight of that. I had to lose everything to see it again. I'm glad I did." The room applauded. Sarah did not. She was busy looking at her phone, a message from Marcus, a photo of a dinosaur he had drawn in class, captioned, "Mom, look, this one's a T-Rex but he's wearing a tie like Richard." She smiled so wide that the photographer for the Denver Post caught it, and the next morning, that was the photo that ran with the story, not Richard at the podium, but Sarah, standing to the side, laughing at her phone, in a room full of people who didn't know yet that she was the reason any of them were there. Part 10, The Lesson. Here is what I want to leave you with. Richard Calloway did not lose everything because he was weak. He lost everything because he had spent so long building that he had forgotten how to simply be present. He had forgotten that the most important rooms in his hotels were not the penthouse suites, they were the lobbies. The in-between places. The places where people arrived uncertain and needed to feel, immediately, that they were safe. He had built 12 of them and had never once sat in one of them as an ordinary person. Until he had no choice. And sometimes that is what life does. It strips the title off the door. It removes your name from the wall. It places you in the middle of something you built and forces you to see it as a stranger would see it. Not to humiliate you. To teach you. To show you what is real and what was only decoration. Gerard's betrayal was real. The legal battle was real. The loss was real. But what was also real, more real, maybe, than any of it, was a cup of coffee set on a side table at 7:15 on a Tuesday evening. A woman who did not know who he was, treating him like he mattered anyway. That is the moment the story actually turned. Not in the courtroom. In the lobby. In a leather chair, next to a fireplace, in a building that bore his name and had temporarily forgotten it. The world will not always see you clearly. The people you trust will not always deserve it. You will lose things you worked your whole life to keep. But if you stay long enough, if you sit still long enough in the rubble of what used to be yours, something will find you. Not money. Not power. Something quieter than that. Something that, on an ordinary Tuesday in December, looks like a woman in a hotel uniform setting down a cup of coffee and saying, "You look like you could use this." And she is right. You could. And it will be the best cup of coffee you have ever had in your life. What would you have done if you were Richard? Would you have told her the truth sooner, or would you have held on to those quiet weeks of being nobody for as long as you could? And what about Sarah? Have you ever been the person in the room who saw something in someone that they couldn't see in themselves? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to read every single one. And if this story stayed with you the way we hoped it would, if it made you think about someone in your life, or something you've been holding too tightly, or a kindness you've been meaning to offer and haven't yet, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because that is why we tell these stories. Not for the views. For the moment after. For the conversation over dinner tonight where someone says, "I heard this story today, and it made me think of you." Subscribe if you haven't yet. We have more stories coming, real, human, complicated, beautiful stories about the moments that changed everything. And trust me, the next one will hit you somewhere you didn't expect. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. That means more than you know.